Welcome to El Zoominario. Today we're very excited to have Dr. Vianey Leos Barajas. She was born in León, Guanajuato, Mexico, but was raised in Bakersfield, California. She received her PhD in statistics from Iowa State University and is currently an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, cross-appointed between Statistical Sciences and the School of the Environment. Thank you very much, Vianey.
No, thank you, Claudia. And thank you for everyone that's here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my work. You'll find that it's actually quite interdisciplinary, although my background is in math and statistics. So identifying latent structures in ecological and environmental data. So when we think about doing mathematics and statistics, we typically think of, these models that we have to put together for data. We have mathematical properties and things of that nature. And I've always been motivated by the application of mathematics and statistics to marine applications in particular, as you see my background in Zoom. So just quickly, I never really thought that this would happen to me, but I got to do a research visit to be the statistician in Galapagos. This is Dr. Alex Hearn, myself working on a project, and we got to hang out with the Galapagos sea lion, right? And technically, I was in the Galapagos Islands for work. So what takes you to the Galapagos Islands as a statistician? My focus is on ecological statistics, sometimes called statistical ecology. And in particular, my focus is for modeling of animal movement. So the data that's collected for animal movement is collected via sensors or drones, sometimes over time and space. And the idea is the movement we observe is a direct result of the animal's latent behavioral state. So maybe we can't see when an animal is eating, but we can collect data remotely, and we can try to infer patterns in the data to figure out if it's foraging, if it's resting, if it's traveling, etc. And in particular in statistics, I work on development of Bayesian methodology and workflows in ecological statistics. So the general class of models that I work with is something called Markov switching models or hidden Markov models. And the reason that they're actually quite commonly applied to animal movement data is because they're really useful for identification of ecologically important underlying behaviors. And as a statistician, it's really fun to come up with models that allow me to capture these patterns and behaviors of animals. I'm also wanting to work on projects that blend physiology and movement dynamics at different temporal scales. So it's kind of like if we have Fitbits, right? Depending on how tired we are is going to affect how we move throughout the day. If we have a lot of energy, we might actually move more during the day, right? So there's this combination of our physical fitness and how we actually move, or our physiology, how we feel that day and how we move. And for environmental data, I've been working on projects related to wind speed forecasting. And again, the fun part of being a statistician is that we learn about things like Markov switching models, hidden Markov models, and we get to apply them to really cool applications. So graphical structure of a basic hidden Markov model. So what is a hidden Markov model? We'll talk about that a little bit. The key idea is that you have an observation process, so something we observe. This is like the animal's movements, the animal's acceleration data. We'll have a few examples that I'll show in a bit. And the state process here. So this is the formal definition of a hidden Markov model. We have an observation and the state process. And for animal movement, the observation process is typically something like, the position of an animal, and the state is the behavior. So I like to show what the data looks like of a hidden Markov model. So let's say we have a 3-state hidden Markov model with normal state dependent distributions, which means we have normal distributions. We have a transition matrix that allows for dependence over time with those normals. And so let's just look at some histograms. It's a bit easier to see. So when we generate data from a hidden Markov model and we make a histogram, it actually looks just like a mixture model. We have data that were generated according to the gold distribution, data that were generated according to the blue distribution, and other data that were generated according to the green distribution. And typically for animals, what this might mean if this were something like speeds at which the animal was traveling, we might think that these higher speeds mean that the animal's just traveling. It's going really fast. It's going somewhere. Maybe the gold distribution corresponds to an animal resting, or it's kind of just going around, lazing about, just having one of those days. And the blue distribution can kind of be an in-between. Maybe it needs to move a little bit, but it doesn't need to travel very far. And then the idea of an HMM is that it looks just like a mixture model, but there's this dependence over time in the mixture components. So when we have some green observations, we're going to have a few green observations at a time, and then we'll switch, and we'll have a few blue observations. We might switch. So we switch between the gold, the blue, and the green. And whenever we have a gold observation, we're typically going to have a few gold observations in a row. Right? So hidden Markov models are just like mixture models with dependence over time. So what are they good for? The idea is that you can connect observations to different patterns. And this in HMMs is called state decoding. Right? So just like we see here, in practice, we don't know which observations correspond to this green or the blue or the gold. But we can actually infer that with these mathematical structures. We can try to assign each observation to either the green, the blue, or the gold. And in ecology, these blue, gold, and green components are typically referencing something that's biologically relevant. Okay? So you have distributions for the different patterns. These are normal distributions. We model the state switching behavior. So how does an animal switch from one behavior to the next? If it's sleeping, what is it likely to do next? And in a loose sense, you might think, well, I have this data for these animals. How many different patterns did they exhibit? How many different behaviors did they exhibit? So you can try to estimate that. And one of the most important things, especially in conservation, is not only identifying the types of behaviors and patterns that we observe, but we want to understand, well, why? Why do they rest in a certain area? Why do they forage in a certain area? And we can try to connect that to habitats, so the critical habitats that are important for animals to forage and animals to rest, and for a variety of other things. Okay. So in particular, and this might sound a bit strange coming from someone with a PhD in statistics, but I love sharks. So I grew up thinking that I always wanted to work with sharks. And you might think, well, if you're a mathematician and a statistician, how does that actually make sense? Well, I would always watch Shark Week and think, they tell me what the animal is doing, and they show the data of where the animal is and where it's going. There has to be a mathematician that analyzes that data. They're collecting such cool data on sharks, and there has to be a mathematician or a statistician that is part of this team. And I want to be that person. And as Claudia mentioned, I did my PhD in statistics at Iowa State University, which, if you know anything about the US, means it's right in the middle. It's not close to any ocean. It's not even close to really big bodies of water. But as a statistician and a mathematician, you don't need to be close to the ocean to work on sharks, right? So one thing that I do a lot is this idea of shark statistics. So I've been part of the American Elasmobranch Society for quite a few years now. I'm probably one of the only statisticians that is part of the Elasmobranch Society, but I love it. So I typically, and I know a lot of people that work with sharks, so shark scientists. I've worked on projects on gray reef sharks, blacktip, oceanic whitetip, great whites, tigers, lemons, horn sharks, leopard sharks, scalloped hammerheads, and bull sharks. So I've worked on quite a few projects that have cool shark data. And to be honest, sometimes it was a bit hard to be the mathematician saying, I want to work with sharks, because if you're in Iowa, that's maybe not the most common thing. But shark data is really, really cool. So the first project I ever worked on was a project that collected data on white sharks in South Africa. So actually my first paper ever was analyzing movement data for white sharks. So we can look at Sarika, this is one of the white sharks, and we can look at her different movements across different days, across different tracking times. And the way that they collected this data is they have a tag on the shark. And the researcher actually had to get on a boat, and she had to get close to the shark in order to detect where it was. And then she would actually manually follow the shark the entire time. Right. So as statisticians, we get data, but then I had to really think about, well, how hard is it to actually collect this data? Right. And working with shark scientists, they always have amazing stories about how they had to go out into the middle of the ocean to try to find these sharks. So Allison was on a boat, and she recorded the position of these different sharks. And what we noticed, just a basic look at this data, is that There's times when they kind of stay around, so there's these clusters of points, and there's other times when they're kind of going up and down. And if you have the map underlaid here, you see that this is actually a coast. So the shark would actually go up and down the coast, and then there were times where she would stay. And we could see this here, and we see this here. She's kind of staying around. We wanted to know, well, why? Why does she stay around in certain parts of the water, and why does she travel up and down other parts? So the idea was in HMMs, especially for animal movement, is that they transform the shark position data into what's called step lengths and turning angles. So it's always easy to Google step lengths, turning angles, movement ecology, and then you'll come up with a few different papers. So the step lengths are continuous. So basically it's the distance traveled between positions. And the turning angles are just the turning angles between 3 consecutive points. It's just how the shark was turning around. And it effectively, the turning angles are on, they take on from minus pi to pi. So if they're closer to either negative pi or pi, means that they're turning quite a bit, meaning they're staying in that area. This is called area restricted search. So we did something really simple. We just did a 2-state hidden Markov model with a distribution for the step lengths and a distribution for the turning angles. Right? So we construct this mathematical formulation. And then what we're able to do is actually connect each of the tracks. So this is an example track. One of the sharks, we can see that the states now, this 2-state hidden Markov model, we have 1 state colored in black and 1 state colored in gray. And the gray observations corresponded to the shark was actually moving quite a bit more, was traveling. And then there were times where the shark would kind of do a lot of turns and stay in an area. And the red dots here these are the observations that were close to where a boat was chumming the waters. So there's also tourism in South Africa as well. We wanted to know, are the sharks affected by the chumming of the tourism boats? Do they tend to stick around? And there could be quite a few different reasons why they do this. But we found that yes, wherever there was chumming activity, the sharks tended to stick around quite a bit. And these little blue fins are actual predation attempts by white sharks that were observed from the boat. And in South Africa, white sharks are actually known to leap out of the water to predate on seals. So this was a lot of fun to actually talk about this with the shark scientists as well. So this is where confirmed foraging and predation attempts were done. I've also worked on accelerometer data. So accelerometer data, in particular, I've analyzed it for oceanic white-tip sharks. It's a 3-dimensional data stream where it typically measures your acceleration in 3 dimensions, so forward and backward, side to side, and up and down. And you can summarize this to a metric called overall dynamic body acceleration. And it's kind of a general way to quantify how much energy you're expending, right? So basically, when is the shark more active? And for those who have not seen a lot of shark data, what I realize is, especially from accelerometer data that's very fine scale, sharks are actually quite lazy. They don't really do that much because they can't expend that much energy all the time. But the idea for HMMs is that we want to construct distributions to capture patterns that we're interested in. And so this is where you can then expand a bit more in the mathematical side and try a bit fancier things. So we have semi-parametric state-dependent distributions. So now our distributions are a bit more flexible than just say like a normal distribution. Right? And this is what our histogram looked like. And the 3 states for the hidden Markov model were really motivated by looking at the time series on the log scale. We have these larger peaks, which means that the shark was actually expending more energy. We have this blue, where the shark was sort of in the middle, wasn't doing as much, and we have these lower periods. And again, we have the gold, the blue, and the green states, which biologically wanted to figure out, well, what does that mean? When are they expending more energy? And when we looked at the dive data, the depth data, we saw that sharks don't need to expend very much energy to go down. They sort of sink because they're negatively buoyant. So this gold typically was when the shark was expending very little energy going down. And then the green was that they were expending sometimes a lot more energy going up. And so my collaborator, Vianey mentioned that oceanic white-tip sharks sometimes spiral up. So they have different strategies for how they ascend. So this could be, this could point to how much energy they actually expend during that type of death, those types of dives. So some of the statistical problems that I typically focus on is this idea of model misspecification. So if I have a Markov switching model or hidden Markov model, how many states, how many different behaviors do I see in the data? What is the correct model and what is the incorrect model? And what does that actually mean in practice? Especially when I'm working with biologists and ecologists, because they really want to, we're fitting these models to advance ecological understanding, right? So it's this key idea of what does this model mean in terms of the ecological problems. So things like identifiability, do I have enough data to actually fit this model? If I construct the model in a certain way, can I actually recover certain parameters, which computational challenges? But for me, the fun is really, as a statistician who's extremely interdisciplinary, is the fun of working with my collaborators to incorporate domain expertise. I cannot just get shark data and know exactly what to do with it. I need to talk with the shark scientists, which is honestly the best part of collaborating with shark scientists, is hearing about, again, how they have to go out into the middle of the ocean, track these sharks, attach these sensors to the sharks, recover the sensors, and everything that can go wrong when trying to find sharks. And really is, as an ecological statistician, a lot of the models that I construct are really to answer ecological problems. So what I do then as an assistant professor is I extend the basic HMM for more fun. So I can show you, let's see if this works. Oh, sorry, maybe it didn't, it's not going to play. So there was one experiment where my collaborator attached a put a red dot on a baby snake, and with the video tracking software, they collected the movements of the baby snakes. So these are called, in ecology, we're calling them multi-scale HMMs or hierarchical hidden Markov models. And the interest was now that there's behaviors occurring at different temporal scales. So we have fine scale behaviors maybe as you're walking versus a large scale behavior as you're walking to work. I've worked with horn shark data in a sort of hierarchical hidden Markov model as well, working with combining data streams at different temporal scales. So this is a paper with Timo Adam. And again, this is all extending hidden Markov models to work with more fun animal data. And this is actually a picture that I got to take when I got to go to Argentina for a research trip. So this is merino sheep, where we're looking at movement and physiology. And when the animal is in different stages of condition, how does that actually affect their behaviors, their movement? So if an animal is in really poor condition, it might need to eat a lot more because it needs to recover its energy. And so that might affect how we see, what the movements that we see and the behaviors that we infer. So thank you so much. Gracias. And I guess a little bit, I can go into a little bit about me now. And these are my two cats when they were kittens, the little fluff balls. So that's the end of my research talk. But for me, para la cultura, and I think this kind of exemplifies me every time I go to Mexico, is that Mexico is really, for me, whenever I go, you go to a candy shop and you get tons and tons of candy that you typically can't find in the US. And now that I'm in Canada, maybe in Canada. So I was born, like Claudia said, in León, Guanajuato, Mexico. When I was about a year old, I went to live in Bakersfield, California. And actually, when I was young, I was undocumented. So I grew up undocumented until I was about 14 years old in California, which maybe people many people might not quite understand, is that while I am Mexican, my family's Mexican, we also have this sort of bicultural living as an undocumented student is kind of just a different experience. So Spanish was my first language, and we mainly spoke Spanish at home when I was growing up. I have two younger brothers, and so they were actually born in the US and they spoke a bit more English. So again, I'm kind of both here and there. When I'm in the US, I'm thought of as more Mexican, and when I'm in Mexico, I'm more American. So I grew up with a mix of cultures. My favorite foods, obviously anything Mexican, enchiladas suizas, mole negro, tacos. And I love tacos de tripa. Like I really, every time I go to Mexico, I look for some good tacos de tripa, which actually tripe, so intestine, but I love it. I think it's one of my favorite foods, although I realize that in the US, that's not really commonly eaten. So any type of Mexican food. And one of the reasons that I'm actually really happy to be in Toronto is that they make a lot of the taquerias around here, the taco shops, they actually make the tortillas. They're fresh. It's so good. So Toronto, come for the Mexican food. You know, come to do a PhD here. There's Mexican food. There's good tacos. Everything's good. And I also realized that as someone who's Mexican American, is that who I am is a very important role, as important part of my role as a professor. My experience as someone who is undocumented, coming from an undocumented family, how we grew up is very different than people around me in academia. And I think it's instilled in me just kind of a motivation to know that I can achieve anything if I work hard, but also that I was provided a lot of opportunities by professors, other Latin American professors. They really helped me get here. And on that note, there is a Latinx in the Mathematical Sciences conference that I thought I would mention here at the end. I'm going to give a talk as part of the statistics panel. The website is down below, ebum.ucla.edu. So it was postponed to next year, but it's going to be March 3rd through 5th, 2022 at UCLA. And so I really hope to see you all there. I would not be here if it weren't for the other Latin American professors that really supported me, provided opportunities for me. Even my new PhD student who's here, Claudia, recommended him. So it was amazing. And I'm really happy to be here with you all, and especially happy that Claudia invited me. So thank you.